Welcome to European Glimpse, the podcast where we explore what moves Europeans. I'm your host, Alice, and today we're traveling to Sweden, one of Europe's most entrepreneurial and technologically advanced states. Sweden has become nearly cashless and fully digitized. From public transport to social services, everything works seamlessly. What happens if you can't access those perks? Today we're diving into that very question with somebody who knows it inside and out. Moa Petersén, an associate professor in digital cultures at Lund University. Moa is a researcher who really understands how technology shapes our culture and society. She's been looking closely at how vulnerable groups in Sweden coexist in so-called cash bubbles. We're going to explore Sweden's journey towards being cashless. We'll, of course, talk about the good parts, but also the less visible challenges that some people face. Moa will explain what it means to be cash dependent, and she will elaborate in what she believes is constructed incompetence in Swedish society. We'll also dig into the role of banks in issuing the necessary digital IDs and how that impacts daily life. Sweden's path to innovation and digital technologies is undoubtedly a success story. But perhaps it is a cautionary tale as well, reminding us that in every success story, there are losers too. Now, let's get into the conversation. All right, welcome to the podcast, Moa. We've been talking about cashless society when we had a little bit of a pre-conversation. I found an article that you wrote on the online magazine, The Conversations, and you've been specialized on this topic of cashless society in Sweden. Let's start by setting the scene. Explain a little bit about what is going on and what is this goal of turning Sweden cashless?
There is no explicit goal first to turn Sweden cashless. The overarching goal is to make Sweden best in the world in digitalization. But when it comes to cash, this is a part of this goal. And there has never been any explicit political aims or goals to do this, because this is foremost not a political initiated change. It's coming from the banks and something we can call the digital imperative, that is just an idea about how things should go, that things should develop in digital ways.
Tell me a little bit about this digital imperative, because it doesn't come out of nowhere. I believe it's pretty rooted in Swedish society.
Yes, we can call it a technological imperative. This was what came before technology became digital, of course. And the technological imperative has been strong in Sweden for a very long time. We have a tradition of seeing ourselves as engineers. There are a lot of inventions coming from Sweden, and we're very proud of that. And the Swedish engineer is like a self-image that we have been bolstering at least since the mid-19th century. So the self-identity of Sweden is to be good in technology. And of course, then it transfers to the digitalization, because this is how you are now good in technology, right? And what has led Sweden forward in the digitalization is maybe an idea that to be good is to be fast. But maybe it would be an idea to look at it if good could also maybe mean to be socially sustainable.
You noted that the banks play a very crucial role in making everything a little bit more seamless in terms of payment and everything a little bit more convenient for the citizens. So could you describe to me, what is the current state when you're basically an average citizen in Sweden? Do you hold cash? How does it work?
I have no idea what the bills and the coins look like in Sweden.
I believe that 80% of the people now have this particular app that you're using in Sweden to do all of the payments between people, between like businesses and consumers. So everything is very, very digitized. But what I find interesting is that the idea of cashless society basically is not only about those little minor conveniences in everyday life and purchasing things. It's as well having access to a lot of services. And could you explain what that means?
We have a system where to identify yourself digitally, this idea is issued by the banks. Banks are allowed to say no if you're not a good bank customer, right? So if you have a migration status that is not stable, and you have something in your past that is not so beneficial for you, then banks are allowed to say no.
So basically, when I'm a citizen in Sweden, when I'm living there, I need to apply for my ID at the bank, and they are free to reject me based on perhaps my income is too low. Is that an option?
Yes, this is an option. You can, of course, also have like a card, an ID card that you can show when you do some things. But to access the services that are almost all digital, everything in the welfare state in Sweden now, the services are increasingly digital. And to access those services, you have to go through this bank-issued ID.
But then explain to me, why is there so much support for it? It sounds like it could be a minor obstacle, and we're going to touch upon that a little bit later when we discuss for whom it is an obstacle. But what are the perceived benefits? Why are so many people so convinced that this is the right mode of doing things?
This is a good question. I think for most people it works. And I think also this that I told you about with the self-image is actually very strong. There is this idea of the digital imperative, and that Sweden is this digital imperative in a way, that we just should do this. And for most of people, it works fine. And it has made lives more convenient for many people. But for a big group, or several groups actually, this is becoming an obstacle to really participate in society and to live life and to feel human worth almost, because you get excluded in several ways, existentially and economically. Vulnerabilities, they tend to cluster. So if you belong to one vulnerable group, you mostly often belong to others also. So there is an intersectionality between this. But the group of poor that we have been looking at, like the socially, economically vulnerable group, this group is not helped by better or developed technology. And the other groups that have a voice in society a little bit, that are in the debate, or the elderly, for example, they have a voice. They have an interest organization who talks for them and everything. And then you have the people with cognitive difficulties. They also have an organization. They have support. But the poor people, they have nobody really who talks for them, and their voice is not heard. So this growing group is actually not ever considered in the discussions about cashlessness or not. Never.
To what degree does this overlap with immigration? I'm just wondering to what degree poor people, which you have described, might not have somebody to support their voices because perhaps they don't speak Swedish enough, or they don't have the communities. Because Sweden is a society with very strong civic society structures, like there are associations, there are trade unions. There's a lot of structure in Sweden for people to be heard and to voice in a democratic way their opinions. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit on what is this group of poor people? What type of people does it consist of?
So they are like completely dependent on non-profit organizations and individuals who help them. So they get extremely dependent on others. These people who help them might also come in very strange situations because they have to go into their bank accounts and they have to do stuff that they really don't want to do. But to save this person, they have to do it. But they don't feel good with the situation either. Now I will return to your question. I know I deviated a little bit from it. We have searched for people who are cash dependent in some way. And the overlap between being poor and cash dependent is very, very strong. It's the biggest indicator of cash dependency to be poor or to have an unstable economical situation. So we search for these people, and this cash dependency, it could also be that they have like a bank card, but for some reasons, this is not the way they would like to pay. And here there are several reasons why that could be. It could be a matter of that you don't want everything to be recorded, or there shouldn't be traces of everything maybe. Many of them have problems to keep abreast with the development in the apps that are changing, and they need new mobile phones, and they need to do updates, and they need to, it costs a lot of money actually, and it costs time. And time is something that we saw is a very important resource
In what way is time an important resource in this matter?
The digitalized society and, for example, then the digitalized payments have made life smoother in a way that makes it possible for us to be in different places in the same time. And we can be on several places on the same time, using a lot of services, almost like in the same parallel on our phones and everything. The internet bank is open 24 hours. We don't have to stand in a line. We don't have to walk. We can take the bus. In Sweden, it's impossible to take the bus if you don't have a phone. You cannot pay with cash.
It's impossible to take the bus if you don't have a phone. What do children do?
In Sweden, children have phones.
All right, so everybody needs a phone, even for the basic things. I find that quite interesting about this picture that you painted, that we can be in several places at the same time. I never really thought about it, but you're completely right. I myself, I'm using a lot of digital services. I can do my grocery shopping, my online banking, and my tax returns within 90 minutes without leaving my desk.
I know.
And so if I think about it, yes, you are right. You would typically go to a physical store. You would typically go to a physical bank. You go in the past to do your tax returns to the tax authorities. And I never really thought about how time-consuming all of these things really are. And so I imagine that when we're going back to the group that you were focusing on that are cash dependent, that they experience a type of burden when the rest of society is already operating in a lot more seamless way. And it's probably even more difficult for them to arrange their lives.
Exactly. It's very difficult for them to have a long-term strategy or an idea how to get out of their situation, because they have to put out small fires all the time and walk here, walk there. I talked to a woman to wash the clothes, to have to be in this room in the house, that you have to book. And in the same time, they're only open for 1 hour in the physical office that you have to go to in this place. How should I divide my time? How should I do? And then I cannot take the bus, so I have to walk. We have this crazy example of the pharmacies, for example, where you cannot pay with cash anymore. So if you are sick and you need something, there is one pharmacy in Malmö that accepts cash. Then you cannot take the bus. You have to walk if you're sick to this pharmacy to buy something.
I'm just picturing there's a lot of people who might be affected by that. I'm wondering as well about specifically the group of the elderly, because when I'm thinking of people I know who are approaching their 90s, their vision might not be good enough anymore to use a phone, or just they simply never jumped on the bandwagon of digitizing fully. To what degree are elderly people excluded from social services?
Well, very much, but they are then dependent on their relatives to a large degree. They are dependent on their children or younger relatives who can help them.
It's basically a way to infantilize citizens. If people are completely dependent then on other ones, it does something. I imagine it does something to your self-perception, and it does something to your as well democratic feeling if you are not fully participating in society.
Of course, we have a concept that we developed from our study that we call constructed incompetence, because it's not the people who have changed, they didn't get less competent, but society changed in a way that constructed them as incompetent.
That's a very interesting point. Do you see any ways where this type of incompetence is being mitigated? Are there public programs, for instance, that offer digital literacy courses for elderly or for people who don't speak Swedish that well because they immigrated?
Yes, but there are. And this is what I said before about these groups that really have a voice and that have organizations who speak for them. They arrange things and they try to make the lives easier for their members and so on. And also technology developers are on that boat a little bit. But this is then often cases or groups who are helped by other types of technology, where technology can be developed in a way that makes it easier for them. But people who are not even in the technological system, who are not even digital, they will not be helped by better technology. So this is the problem here. So even if it sometimes looks like, oh, we take care of these groups that are now being excluded and everything, there is one group that is not taken care of, and this is growing and it's not having a voice.
You said that it is growing. Do you have quantitative numbers of how large the group of cash-dependent people is and why it is growing?
No, I don't have that actually. And nobody has that really. It's difficult to measure it. I wanted to pick up what it does to the self-worth, also to the feeling of democracy and to be part of society and so on. One of the interviewees, she said, oh, there feels like there is no way in. We cannot get in. We give up. It feels like you are a human of a different kind.
That is a very drastic experience, I imagine. And I wonder to what degree is this accepted within the majority of Swedish society, or if people just simply don't know? Do you have the impression that when you talk to other people who are not familiar with your research and with this issue, that they know what is going on?
Most people don't know. It can be this simple thing that the ID is issued by the banks and these problems that comes from this. Most people, they haven't even reflected on that. And when they start, they're like, yeah, this is actually a bit strange. But if you talk to people who are not from Sweden, they immediately react, of course, because this is not the situation in other countries.
Yeah, I just wonder to what degree is there a sort of welfare patriotism related to this development? Me living in Germany, I know that people here are very defensive when it comes to touching the welfare state. And there's a lot of heated debates about welfare fraud, even though the numbers indicate that it's not really a big issue. There might be exceptions, but people feel very defensive. And I wonder if this pattern has occurred as well in Sweden, which justifies the entire movement towards digital IDs, giving the banks so much authority on such issues. Do you observe something similar?
I can say that the main argument for going forward with the cashlessness is that it creates a safer society. And this is then because it protects people who are handling money, like bus drivers and people at the cashier in stores and so on. But this argument did not pop up until pretty late in the process. This is like a techno-solutionist argument that came up later. I mean, it's not wrong. Of course, it makes it safer, but this is not part of the onset.
Basically, as well, the assumption that people cannot be trusted if they handle cash and that they might steal something or that something illegal might happen. And I find this very interesting as well from a trust society. And the article that you published in the Conversation magazine, there was as well a little section towards the end where you wrote about how it changes community and how it changes society and people not really having that much interaction with each other. And I'm linking this to this actually negative worldview. It's a negative view of humans that you cannot be trusted with cash. You will lose it or you will steal it or something might be going on. To what degree are you observing such trends that the techno-solutionist answer might be breaking some parts of social cohesion and trust?
That's true. I mean, if you handle cash today in Sweden, then you're either a criminal or you you're viewed as possibly a criminal, or there is something wrong with you. There is something that is not right. You cannot go through the digital system, so something is wrong. And it's suspicious to have cash and it's dirty. And this, of course, got a big upswing during the pandemic because then cash was kind of dirty, because to touch the bills and everything could be a way of contamination. So this generated actually the whole process toward cashlessness. And the signs that were put up then, no cash, they were not taken down later. But yeah, so the whole idea that to use cash and handle cash is a marker that you are not a person who can show everything you do, that you're a bit shady. You don't want everything to be recorded. This is clearly here. Like, it's like a stigma, actually, to have cash here. For example, in food stores, we have one cashier that accepts cash in the bigger stores still. And the people who stand in line for this one, and this is also what came out from our interviews, well, we go to with a cashier that accepts cash, and then if you stand in this line, you're a bit less good than the others.
I'm just wondering, over the last years, unfortunately, the world has not been very stable. There's been a lot of refugee movement in Europe recently with Ukrainian refugees, for instance. Can you talk a little bit about how this group of people who are fleeing from other countries, how they may be entering the system, or what the implications of mainly cashless system implies for them?
I mean, it depends very much on the social status that you had in your home country. And usually it takes a while because you have to have your social security number in Sweden then, and you have to get into the society in different ways. And then you can become a bank customer. So it's often a long process. And I work at the university, and there we have sometimes like guest researchers who come for a time, and they experience the same thing. I mean, it maybe goes faster for them because they have a higher social status or something, but they still have these weeks where they cannot actually do anything. They cannot access their children's school platforms. Most communications from schools, for example, it goes through digital platforms as well. So if you cannot access that, you don't know what they should bring to school the next week if they're going to a picnic or whatever.
You need your digital ID as well to access information from public institutions.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
And if you don't have the digital ID, you're pretty much excluded as well from the people who might be helping you and who might be giving important guidance, as in the example of telling what your children need.
Yes, exactly. So if you're dependent on cash, and also actually if you're dependent on like physical meetings, you're a little bit behind. Actually, it's a scary development, I have to say.
We've touched upon the fact that there is a higher distrust. There is more skepticism towards people who are excluded out of the system. There are many people, a growing number, as you pointed out, who are excluded from the digital system. And I just wonder, what is the perspective that you see? What is the development that you see?
One of the problems with this is that the people, for example, that we interviewed, who are mostly dependent on cash, they go to the stores that accept cash still. So you can talk about like economical exclusion or digital exclusion, but we also found that it was like they were actually captured within bubbles in society where cash is almost like a local currency. They maybe don't have the money to go to the expensive cafes. They go to the cheaper cafes that still accept cash. They have like enough to live, but they can never expand and they can never change their lives, really. This was a bit scary also, actually, because it does also not motivate really a societal uproar from this group also, because they are like contained in this, bubbles. We call it cash bubbles, by the way.
Have you encountered any individuals in your research who managed to leave those cash bubbles?
No, we did not. No, but actually, all of the ones that we interviewed, they had very little trust or hope that their situation would ever change. It was very depressing, actually.
Explain a little bit more about the people that you've interviewed. It's just very hard for me to picture when you have a system that is kind of excluding you because you don't have access to digital services. How do you make a living?
Yeah, it's a lot up to the nonprofit organizations. The people that we met, they were going to like these places. We have, for example, Stadsmissionen. So they were going there, and there they could buy very cheap food. Sometimes they also got food for free. So they were kind of living their lives in a way in these places. They had like an atelier where they could paint and where you could, different kind of activities. So a lot of their lives were circulating around these non-profit organizations. If they wouldn't be here, then I don't know if it would work, actually.
That is quite concerning, but isn't there any type of public debate or maybe a political direction that might include those people, because when I was preparing for the interview in advance, I saw, for instance, that in March in Sweden, central banks were doing a little bit of a U-turn when it came to the cashless priority, but it was due to geopolitical developments, and that basically means that the banks are going to have a larger cash reserve instead of relying fully on the digital payment. But I wonder, beyond that, is there any indication of opportunities that might be expanded to open the gateway for people who are excluded?
Yeah, this is interesting. This thing that you were referring to, I think it was an article in The Guardian, right? The Swedish National Bank has for a long time argued that cash should still be in the system. Because if it completely disappears and everything is on the private banks and so, the Swedish National Bank, the state bank, would of course lose the control. So the cash money, if this disappears, their role also disappears in a way. They have tried to launch an e-krona to keep up. I think this is ditched now. This U-turn is a really wrong word to use, because there is no U-turn going on at all. But what is happening is that the Swedish National Bank is the voice for that cash should still be in the system. And also I don't know what it's called in English, but the Authority for Resilience and War Preparation, they handed out a brochure in November 24, I think, where a lot of advices were written about what you should do if the crisis or the war comes. And here it's written, be prepared to pay with different kinds of payment.
I mean, it makes sense if you think about cybersecurity threats, and if people are hacking one of the major services or even commercial actors in the Swedish system, and then you don't have access to products, goods, services, then of course this is a major disruption. And what I always imagine, that once you have established this system where everything is so easy, so digital, so seamless, it's very difficult to build it back.
Yes.
Like, it's very difficult to go back from this system to a more hands-on, we have cash in our pocket system.
Yeah, exactly. So this brochure, in it's written, keep some cash at home. And this feels actually a little bit like a joke, because what should you do with that cash if something happens? There is no infrastructure, because it has been taken down, everything. There is no way to use your money if you had it. Maybe it could develop pretty fast, I don't know, but the infrastructure is for sure not there anymore.
I think it's interesting that you highlight those downsides, because I've always had the impression that this path that Sweden is pushing forward is something that a lot of nations admire, and it's something that probably Swedes are as well proud of and displaying to the international world, in showing how good things can be, how seamless, how modern, how efficient everything could be. But a lot of people just falling between the cracks, a lot of people not being part of the community anymore. And I would like to ask you, what is the research going forward on this? Where would you like to focus a little bit more? Where do you think are still gaps and blind spots when it comes to the community of cash-dependent people?
And the question that we always get when we're out talking about this is, what should we do? And it would, of course, be super interesting to work together closely with politicians or the welfare state representatives, where we might develop something or be a part of developing something that could help these people better technology. So this would be the dream, to be able to do that. As for now, we have raised the question, and there is a lot of interest around the question, I have to say, because there are a lot of people. Almost everybody has somebody who has problems with this system in their closeness, a relative or a friend, everybody knows somebody. So I think people realize that it is a problem, but it's not a part of their lives, and they're not a part, they cannot get it into their life puzzles, they have to run on and do everything so conveniently like they now are doing it, because being in the same omnipresent, everywhere in the same time through the digital services. But what I would like to also to pass on to other countries who stand maybe at the decision, should we do this or not, is that return to question zero. I mean, if the answer is cashless society, what is the question? Why? Because in Sweden, it's clear, if you look at like older political documents and everything, that this huge societal change that we have done did not start from a social good.
Let's rephrase it perhaps a little bit, or let's make a positive version. Do you have a vision of how a digital social good in the case of Sweden could look like that would benefit more people and that would as well include vulnerable groups?
Well, I think something like that should maybe have been taken into account in the beginning. Now I'm not so positive again, but I think it's difficult to go back when digital advancement and this digital imperative has already started. I mean, the digital system builds on itself in a way. So if you have one digital component, then this will be upgraded, and then something will be added and something will be added. The whole complexity of this system that builds on it, it's like self-referential in a way. This is not easy to fix later. So if the social good would have been a part of it from the beginning, this would have probably had a very different outcome, I think, in the end. I cannot really say so much about what that would look like. It would be very speculative, but to maybe speak to people in these situations and what they would need and what would not work for them, this would have been very good, I think. So epistemic injustice is a very good way to describe this, because this means that some of the experience and the knowledge around something, what it is like to live in digital exclusion, what it is like to have a life that doesn't really work because of the society has gone somewhere else. This knowledge and this experience are not taken into account as knowledge, really. So this is also an exclusion in the whole. There are a lot of exclusions going on in this cluster.
I think it shines a light on, well, those downsides and how people are very easily overlooked. And it's not a news story. Like everywhere where you look when it comes to implementing digital technology, there's always some gap where the most vulnerable people are overlooked. So you highlighting that nuance is, I think, very important work. Sweden still shines as a forerunner in digital technology. Sweden is a role model in many ways when it comes to digitizing public services in a way that makes everything more convenient for citizens. But the nuance that you add, that not everything is perfect for everybody and that there are gaps, people falling through the cracks in spite of a good system, is a lesson that a lot of countries' policymakers, I believe, can learn from. So it's very, very, very valuable what you do.
Yeah, I think also this idea of what is a good digitalization, when are you good in digitalization, is also very important. For Sweden, it was to be fast and to make everything smooth and to be cool. But maybe it should be rephrased as to be good is to be inclusive and to be democratic and to be sustainable.
That's a wonderful last sentence. Thank you very much for the conversation. I'm definitely going to follow your work. I really find it fascinating. I still cannot picture how difficult life must be of people who are excluded from such an elaborate system. So thank you for shining a light on that.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of European Glimpse. This is a passion project of mine, and it would make me very happy if you subscribed or shared this episode with a friend. Now I'm curious to find a new guest. Are you a journalist, a scholar, a student, or perhaps an avid observer of society? If you live in a European country, as well outside of the European Union, reach out to me or recommend somebody I should speak to. I would as well love to hear your feedback on this podcast, as I'm always trying to improve, and my email is europeanglimpse@gmail.com. Take care.